All right, this is Professor Triplet, and we are going to start looking at the viewport and all these different things that are in the viewport a little bit more closely. Some of them we'll get into and use, and some of them we'll probably just gloss over a little bit. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click View, and instead of me sitting here holding my cursor here, if I go ahead and just click right on this little bar here, it goes ahead and drops the menu out, and I can just go ahead and pull this anywhere I like, and we can have a conversation about what all these things mean. So I think some of these are pretty self-explanatory. Select camera. Obviously, if you whatever camera you have that you're looking through. So in this case, perspective, we hit select camera, and if you notice that my perspective camera just lit up in the outliner, and I have my attribute editor open. So here's all the attributes for the camera. Lock camera. Well, you can imagine what that means is now if I try to tumble my viewport, I can't. I'm trying, it won't let me. So the camera is locked. Okay. Create camera from view. This is very helpful. So if you need a new camera and you want to just keep a camera somewhere, maybe lock it or something like that, you can go ahead and just hit that button, and it will pop another camera in here into your outliner, and you can go ahead and do whatever you need to with it. This is very helpful. Undo view change. So let's go ahead and just let's make the box, the famous box that we always make, and let's go ahead and make it a meter. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move my view and then hit Alt Z, and then I'm going to hit Alt Y to go forward. So as you can see, it'll keep moving back and forth. Depending on, I'm not sure how many of those it saves in there, but sometimes like you get into a good spot and then you accidentally move your viewport and you want to go right back to the spot you were at, and it's just nice to be able to hit those and go back and forth. Default view, Alt Home, that's kind of like bringing it back to what you see when you first open up Maya. View along axis. I honestly never used this before, but you can tell from what it's doing that it basically it's just going to move it in the axis that you want it to, which is actually, this could be very helpful. But that is literally the first time I ever used that. Look at selected. Obviously, we are looking at it, but that apparently it kind of seems to work the same thing as frame selection. I was wondering what the difference was there. So if I hit frame selection and I hit look at selection, it seems to do the same thing. So I'm a little baffled by why that's different, but maybe somebody out there knows. Center view of selection. So let's just say I'm here and I hit it. It's kind of doing the same thing. All right, so let's just go through some of these. Frame all. Frame all is going to frame everything in the scene. So in other words, if I have like 5 items and they're scattered around and I hit frame all, it's going to pull back so I can see all of them. But the frame will bring me right to whatever item I have selected. So that would be the difference between frame all and frame selection, which is just F, and you do use that a lot. Frame selection with children, I'm assuming that has to do with if this thing has children, it will frame this item and the children. And we're not really going to be worried too much about children at this moment, but it's a good thing to have. Align camera to polygons. This is very interesting. So if I grab a face and say align camera to polygons, look at that, it just aligns to polygons. That's a nice little thing that you might want to have as a modeler. You might want to have that as your a hotkey set for that. Okay, so there's other camera settings, bookmarks. You can go ahead and read about some of these things if you like. I have used bookmarks in the past, and for some reason now it's eluding me, but I believe it has to do with setting up certain settings for your cameras, and being able to go back to them. image plane. You can actually put image planes inside of a camera so that you can basically see an image in your viewport. So like if you're modeling from it, some people like to do that. I personally don't like the image plane method. I actually like putting like an actual geometry plane in my scene, but it's all personal preference. A lot of people do use image planes. So I think that's good for this one. Let's go into the shading. Obviously wireframe, you know what that is. You could just hit 4 on your keyboard. And this is smooth shade selected items, so you can specifically specify which ones you're going to smooth shade. Flat shade all. So let's bring a sphere in here and make this 100. Actually, let's do 50. All right. Smooth it out. So if we go shading, flat shade. Now I don't know if you can notice the difference, but it takes the smoothing off just in the viewport. It doesn't necessarily take it off on the object itself, but it's just because this is selected. So if I say smooth shade, well, I just did the selected item, so you can see what that does. Smooth shade all will show the proper smoothing on each item. So sometimes you might just want to see the facets. So when you do flat shade, you can see that. Let's see, bounding box is going to show you where the bounding box is for this item without actually rendering that item. Sometimes you need to speed up your viewport, and that might be one way to do it. Let's go back to smooth shade. And so use default material. That basically will get rid of all your different materials. There's a kind of a quick way to do that is just if you go ahead and hit 5 on your keyboard, it's basically putting on the smooth shade all, but you'll just basically see a gray material. X-ray is interesting. Oh, I'm sorry, wireframe unshaded. So wireframe unshaded is nice because a lot of times you do want to see the wireframe on an object even though it's not being selected. So that's basically what that's good for. X-ray basically gives kind of a shaded view, but you can still see through it. And this gets pretty important a lot of times when you're working with rigging and stuff. But there are times when you're modeling, you may use X-rays as X-ray joints, X-ray active compounds. Self-explanatory, but not stuff that we need now. Backface calling. Now this is an interesting one. So backface calling. Let's go ahead and turn off X-ray. So we see backface calling. So we didn't see anything happen, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and all right, so let's talk about backface calling. I brought my attribute editor out just because I wanted to show, I in the attribute editor video, I did a reverse on a box and then it turned black and then I turned off the double-sided, okay? Well, I want to show that backface call basically turns off the double-sided too. That's basically how that works. It's technically still double-sided in the rendering though, but what it'll do, the backface call will turn it off for the actual just the viewport. So that's what that does. Okay, so let's see what else we got here. I'm not going to go into these and the smooth wireframe. We don't need to really go into that either. Let's turn off the backface call. And so what we'll do here is just reverse this again. All right, so let's go into lighting. You can see here, use all lights. So if I turn this on, see everything turns black. Why? Because we don't have any lights in the scene. So let's just drop in a point light, bring it up here. And you can see how this thing will show lights in the scene. And you can even do shadows. So now it's casting shadows. Now this does become more intense on your graphics card, and if you have big scenes, you may not want to use stuff like this unless you really need to. But you can see it's self-explanatory. You can select a light and say use selected lights, use flat lighting, use no lights. So I actually am not quite sure what the use flat lighting is. I've never used that, but we can go ahead and just try it. So, oh, okay, I see it. It's flat. It's flat shaded. Then that's what that meant. So basically, it's not doing any kind of shading. You're just seeing like the flat object. And this, in some cases, may be useful, but typically, I don't need that too much. Anyway, if I hit 6 on my keyboard, it turns off the lighting in the viewport. If you hit 5, or the 6 will show textures though. If I hit 5, it'll just be smooth shaded. You can see every time I hit it, I'm getting a message up here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the light. And let's go to show. Okay, so now this is an interesting thing. If we have something selected and we go to show and you go isolate select, view selected, which is also control 1, it basically will only show the thing that you have selected. Now, this also works if you're just selecting faces. You can hit control 1 and it'll just show you the faces that you have, and then hit control 1 again, it brings everything back. Okay, so let's go back to object mode, select that. But what you can do is you can filter out the type of things that you want to see. So anything that's in this list, you can turn it off. For instance, the grid. I just turned the grid off in this list. Now that is also, you have a shortcut to that here. And the reason why some of these shortcuts are up here is because these are things that you may use quite often. So that's why those are there. Render 2.0. They used to have more renders. They had like a high quality and the original viewport, but now it's just 2.0. They've gotten rid of the old legacy stuff. So I'm kind of baffled that this is still here, but I'm sure they're going to maybe add a 3.0 at some point. Panel. So we're in perspective. Stereo camera would be for like a 3D camera, rendering basically 2 cameras at once. And then you have your orthographics. These are self-explanatory. Front, side, top. You want to see your top view. That's our top view. So we can switch to our perspective again through here. But of course, there's the shortcuts of hitting your space bar and then left clicking and holding, and you can go to perspective and top and all your views from there too through the hotbox. So okay, so what else do we have in here? Hypergraph. So these are just other panels that you might use. What it's doing though is it's basically dropping it into this viewport. So right now we're not going to be using the hypergraph. We won't really need that for these tutorials, but there's different a few different viewports that you can set up if you would like. So in fact here you have like Hypershade. If I want to see my materials, I can just go ahead and hit that, and there we go. It's jumping all over the place, acting kind of crazy. But so like instead of actually having to switch to the hypergraph or the Hypershade or whatever, you could just use this one viewport and switch between them. Up here, these are basically, we've seen all these options, but these are just shortcuts to it. So if you pan over, although I don't think we saw film gate. So film gate's going to show you like what your render size, like the area that you're actually going to render if you hit the render button. Let me turn that off. And then you have your resolution gate. Actually, I should say the resolution gate should be the one that's the size. Let's see. Yeah, the resolution gate is your actual resolution you'll render at. And then film gate would be relating to like, whatever they have the film gate set to. So that's resolution gate. And then you can turn off that fogginess that it has on. Let's see, let me turn it back on. This gray you can turn off. This is a field chart, so then this is kind of like if you had to measure and know exactly where certain things are in your frame, you can turn this on. This is title safe, or I should say this is, I think, action safe, yeah, and then this is title safe. So basically, if you turn these on, these are kind of like guides to let you know, like, if you're going to do a title, it should really be within here. You shouldn't have it off towards the edges. And what that does is that in the big picture, like if it gets shown on a different TV or in Europe or somewhere else, it doesn't get your title doesn't get cut off. So that's why they made up kind of these rules of like, this is where the title safe is. This is where the action safe is. Like, don't have a bunch of action happening between here and here. They're general rules that, obviously can be broken, but for the most part, it's safer to hold to these rules. Of course, these are, like, this is wireframe. This is the X-ray, I think. Let me see, am I right? Or actually, that's just smooth shaded. It should say, actually. Yeah, smooth shade all. Use default materials, so you can just turn everything to just be using the Lambert default material. Wireframe unshaded, so I typically just use these buttons here when I'm switching, or I use my hotkeys. I'm not usually going into all these panels most of the time. Use all lights. So this is all stuff that we've seen. Screen space ambient occlusion is actually kind of interesting. I didn't see that in any of the panels, but I might have missed it. But what this does is, if you have this on, I don't know if you can notice, it's getting a little bit. Let's turn off that. And turn that off. You can see there's like kind of this little dark area between these two. So it's using like a viewport ambient occlusion, and it could be helpful to define things, but it also is going to slow down your viewport a little bit. So if you have a heavy scene, you might want to leave that off. Motion blur, same kind of thing. It's gonna you can actually see that in the animations. It'll approximate motion blur if you have that on. And multi-sample anti-aliasing. So that's just gonna make the viewport cleaner and anti-alias it more. So if you just notice there, I don't know if you can see it, but my wireframe was like basically more solid and nicer anti-aliased. Again, it's taxing the graphics card, so it's fine to use, but if you're bogging down, you may want to turn the extra stuff off. This is isolate selected, so you have a button for that, or of course Control 1 is the same thing. And then these are the X-rays, and then this is your exposure in gamma, and we're not going to go into that right now because this is primarily for modeling, so not that important until we get to rendering stuff. But this is, I believe these are for the viewport though. This isn't actually for like the actual renderer. So you can set different gammas and stuff like that. So, all right, so that's basically a roundup of the just this viewport. And we're about almost 18 minutes in, but you can see there's a lot in here. I should say one more thing that I didn't mention. Maybe you're wondering is, how did I get these numbers up right here? You may be saying, how do you get that so you can see how many polygons or verts this object has? So basically, my scene total has 390 verts, 792 edges, but the object I have selected is in this aisle, and this has 12 edges and 6 faces and 12 triangles, and the UVs are 14. So how do you get that? You go to display, you go to heads up display, and you check poly count right here. So if I turn that off, you'll see it just went away. Display, heads up display, poly count. So for polygon modeling, this is something you're definitely going to want to have up, especially when you get to points where you're selecting verts, and if you accidentally, like, you were cutting something and you didn't hit, you didn't like cut to the vert perfectly, you might be selecting like 2 verts, and then you'll realize that, you'll see it up here, you'll see, I have 2 verts selected. Then it just lets you know that, maybe you didn't cut perfectly and you need to fix that. So, yeah, this is a really good thing to have up. So that's about it for the viewport. I'm sure there's way more depth you can go into, but this is a decent overview. So thanks for watching.